I want to call the city council work session into order. And before we get on to the agenda item, I wanted to put a pitch up for something. There is a new organization on Tarleton's campus. It's a nonprofit business called Tarleton. It's for the College of Business. And they're trying to teach, allowing students to run a nonprofit business, but have to make a profit on it. So all the proceeds that they make on their products go back to the organization, and then they give those to student affairs for activities for students on campus. It's a great activity, and I got the opportunity today to participate in an advertisement. I get to show you what some of their products are. One of their products is, and by the way, they don't know I'm doing this today. This is a beautiful Tarleton tie, obviously purple. Go, Purple Thursdays. So anyway, they have ties, bow ties, cups. There was a laundry list of things, but I'd encourage everybody to participate. Go see the online Tarleton College of Business. See what you can buy. As a matter of fact, on the advertisement, I said I'm sure all the city council will buy something. So just FYI, I just kind of prodded y'all a little bit. So
We're smiling.
Oh well. Anyway, all right.
We're
Back.
liking you to see us.
Now back to real business. It is. Whereas I'm going to turn this over. Is it to Monica or Alan? You going to start us off? Monica. Well, let me start by saying I'm going to introduce a little bit tonight. Tonight's a very high-level review. It's not to talk about we can have questions for Monica, etc. But I asked today, Jason, Alan, and Monica and I talked, and this is a very high-level discussion. And I'm going to encourage everybody that has questions, specific questions about any particular item, to email them to those three, and make that way at our work session, which is the 13th,
17th, 19th, 17th, 19th, 20th.
17th, 19th. This will be Tuesday, Thursday, and
Tuesday, Wednesday,
Monday, Wednesday, and
and
Thursday. Will be our opportunity to answer all of our questions, etc., and help deal with our questions. So tonight's a high level. We'll have opportunity for questions, but please, if you have any detailed, why can't we or whatever, let's email them and let them bring the answers back to us. With that said, Monica, she said it was your turn.
Go ahead, Mom.
I had sent out a draft of information for the budget, and so I'm just going to go over some of the highlights in it. With our property tax, we budgeted at what we anticipate the 47 cents per 100 tax rate would be. Obviously, we don't have the certified values from the CAD yet. We anticipate to get those on the 14th. With the original numbers that we got, it's considerably less revenue than we got the previous year. Our sales tax, we based on the actual receipts that we got from August 2018 through July 2020, so it does include the dip that we had in June, which was for April when we were completely closed down, with an anticipation that could happen again. The sewer revenue does include the third of the 20 cents per 1,000 gallon rate increase. We don't have the rates figured out for the rest of water and sewer, but we knew that would be in there. There'll be some more discussion at a later date on some of the water and sewer rates. And then the hot revenue, we budgeted at 20% below the fiscal year 1920 because we anticipate the hotels to still be impacted by COVID-19. For our personnel, we did include a cost of living increase for our employees of 1.5%. We did follow the employment and salary policy that the council approved last year, which was that employees that were not at max pay received the full 1.5%. Employees that were at max pay, which includes the executive staff, because there's only one pay for us, received just 0.75% annual increase. The proposed pay plan is at the 0.75 because that was part of the pay plan and the policy that we approved last year, is that the pay plan would move half what the increase each time that was approved would move. The pay plan does include a new planner position, and this fiscal year, the executive assistant to city manager was combined with the HR position, And so we're including that in this new pay plan as well. The fire department had requested 6 firefighter EMT positions. Those were not included in the admin recommendation. The development service department requested an administrator position and a planner position. Only the planner position, for a total of $68,406 in salaries and benefits, is included in the administration recommendation. Of course, we show the executive assistant city manager and the secretary for the HR manager. We combined those into one position, and that's reflected in the city manager's budget, and we did remove the secretary position out of the HR budget.
So was that a wash?
It actually saved a little bit of money.
Okay.
Saved approximately $30,000.
Okay.
We have budgeted a 3% vacancy, which is equivalent to 24 months of police officer, 24 months of a firefighter EMT, and 5 months of dispatch vacancies. The landfill department requested that their part-time heavy equipment operator position be changed to a full-time position, which is included in the admin recommendation. And the downtown administrator position, which had been in the city manager budget, has been moved to its own downtown department. With that, we've also included an operating budget for the downtown department. Obviously, this is our best guess because this is a brand new department, brand new thing that we're doing. So the operation budget was about $8,220. We've included $11,000 for arbitrage consulting in the finance department because we've got a bunch of new bonds. We've included $22,000 in landfill outside professional for rate analysis and its expansion over the type 1 area that has been previously closed.
So does that mean it's because we're gonna try to open up another cell in preparation for that?
I'm gonna do an aerial fill on top of the closed, type 1 area that's been closed for a number of years. We're exploring, doing an aerial fill on top of that to expand the capacity.
Going to go vertical. Nick estimates that given the acreage of the former type 1 landfill, that the space that a vertical expansion will allow us to operate for the foreseeable future, as in many, many decades.
Okay.
In the hot fund, we've included $75,000 for advertising with the day tripper. That was just recently approved by council. Part of that will be in this fiscal year, and $75,000 will be in next fiscal year. We have included the $107,888 for the downtown revitalization plan for their third of it, and then for Moolah Fest, we've included $78,000 net revenue versus expenses for Moolah Fest next year. The 2020 infrastructure bonds debt is reflected in the debt service fund. Right now, we have it to be paid from the TIF revenue and general fund reserves. We are looking at changing that and having some of it come out of the utilities for their portion of Hartman Drive. Capital that we've included, and this doesn't include anything that's carried over like Eastside Sewer or the CDBG GLO grant. In the street department, they requested a asphalt hot box that's included. We've included the Parks and Rec athletic maintenance shop and the relocation of it, which we did receive some insurance money this year for that. Police, we've included 3 2021 Chevy Tahoes for patrol. We have included the engineering for the 536-acre well field to get prepared for doing that project over the next couple years. We've also included for the 377 ground storage tank rehab, and also a ground storage tank engineering for a ground storage tank at the airport. There's, in the original plan, there was a place for 2, and there's just 1 there now. Wastewater collection, we've included a half-ton truck, and in stormwater drainage, we've added $400,000 for stormwater drainage for Graham Avenue that's coming up, And then for the capital projects, we have included the annual street maintenance program, which is 8% of sales tax and 8% of property tax. So in the document, which has tons of numbers, I'm not going to go over each one individually tonight, but we have included each one of the approved, the authorized positions, the people that are in them, what they currently make, what the increase would be for them, and what their pay would be going into the next year, including any step increases if somebody was to go from one step to the next.
That includes that step increase.
Hmm?
That includes the step increase.
That includes the step increase, because police and fire, those positions definitely have where they get step increase when they hit certain longevities. We also included all the requests for the new positions. I included the pay plan with the 0.75% increase in it. We've included all the capital requests in detail, and then also the fee schedule that has been previously brought to the Finance Committee before. So if we'll look at page 3 of the document, which should show up where I'm sharing my screen. This is a summary of our revenues and over under our expenditures, including the net of the transfers. So if you'll look at the general fund, what we have in there currently in the admin recommendation, there's a deficit of $369,859. When we take out the things that were committed from like this year's budget that we anticipate to be carried over, some insurance proceeds, and then also the committing of the when we did the 2020 bond, we said anything that the TIF couldn't pay that the general fund would cover out of their reserves. So we take that out. There'll be a surplus of $35,000. So the general fund is okay for now. When we look at the water and sewer fund, of course the deficit shows about $14 million, but a big chunk of that is the East Side Sewer, which we took out a loan. We've already, received all that money, so it's in there, and then we have some carryovers. There'll still be expenditures that will require reserve funding of about $45,000. So we definitely will need to be looking at a rate increase to cover that, because we're going to have some expenditures coming up in future years for our 536-acre well field, and we'll go over that a little bit in more detail shortly. For the landfill fund, we have a surplus of $468,000, and there's not any adjustments to that. For the airport, there is a deficit of $159,000. We have reserved the general fund balance in the amount of $384,000 to cover what we need to have for the matching on the expansion. So we do have some to cover that. For the stormwater fund,
Monica?
yes, sir.
The underfunding on that is because of the expansion.
Yes.
If it weren't for that, would the airport be operating in the black? Or is there a breakdown that separates those?
Well, yeah, because when you look at it, when you look at your most of our revenue would come into what you would consider the service charges category. So if you look at that, it's $109,000. So there's a very minimal personnel cost of about $2,400, which is just for the janitor to go clean part-time. And then we have operating expenditures currently at about almost $80,000. So there is a little bit when you're looking at operating expenditures versus operating revenue. There's a little bit of a surplus in there each time.
Okay.
But that grant, when we're dealing with the FAA, is a 10% match, and when you're looking at $10 million projects, that $20,000 doesn't go very far.
Right, but we budgeted for that.
We did. We
Yeah.
committed general fund fund balance for that.
Right.
And I think we ought to consider that because this is an enterprise. Airport is an enterprise, right?
It is an enterprise fund, yes.
So the $1 million plus that we've dedicated is out of general fund, which is what would be paying for streets, sidewalks, payroll, et cetera. So I think we're not gonna be able to fund $1 million at the airport, but I think we need to address that when we look at rates or fees or whatever at the airport, because the general fund is funding the enterprise. And Monica and I have talked about that, so she's gonna help walk us through that later at another date.
So in the stormwater fund, we're looking at a deficit of $519,000. A good chunk of that is because we've included $400,000 for the storm drainage for Graham. We did have some net carryover for the CDBG grant because there's revenues and expenditures on it. So there's an amount that would require reserve funding of about $500,000. So definitely we are looking at an increase to the stormwater drainage. If we increase, the basic rates for that are $2, $3, and $4. If we increase those each $1, that would get us about $218,000 a year additional revenue. That would cover almost half of the deficit, so we'd cover most of our deficit the next 2 years, and then anything after that would be adding to our reserve fund. So $1 may not be enough. We may need to look at a little bit more depending on what future projects we have in storm and how fast we need to get them done or want to get them done.
Is stormwater drainage part of the Harbin Drive project?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Is that included in here?
that is not included in there.
So see, I think that's something else we ought to look at is, as we redo Harbin, I mean, we have the funds through a loan to do Harbin, but to allocate it, if it's stormwater, it's stormwater. We ought to consider charging it to stormwater rather than to that debt service for Harbin Drive. I think we ought to consider that in the conversation.
Yes. The hotel occupancy fund has a deficit of $35,000, and that's because we do have the 107 for the revitalization plan, and then also the Millifets is in there as well, plus lower anticipated revenues. Then in our debt service fund, basically it's fine because you have the taxes coming in to cover it, and you only put as much in taxes as you actually have to pay out. For our capital projects fund, it's a deficit of $12.5 million, but that's because we got the bond proceeds this year, and when you take those out, it's fine. And then if you'll notice, we have a new fund. It's a TIF special revenue fund. So we have included about $30,000 in taxes coming in, about $20,000 in property tax, and about $10,000 in sales tax. And that's just on the increase from the existing property and businesses that are currently there. This is just a best guess, stab in the dark until we actually get some solid numbers in. And the way that we've got this set up to work is that we will be transferring money in from the general fund. This is the way we have it right now. It could come in from general fund, water, and storm to come in to cover the debt, and then the amount for the debt payment will go to the debt service fund. The reason why we're doing it that way is because the general fund, one of the things that was said is that when the TIF becomes self-supportive, any of the general fund revenues that had to be used to cover the debt get paid back. So this is the best way to track getting paid back.
So if we did a TIF project, like a hotel, and someone else helped participate, like county, they would be part of our TIF board, right?
That is correct.
And so how would that be in this budget, or would it be how would we count for their portion of?
They would account for their portion.
Separate from us?
Yes, sir.
And then our non-major special revenue funds, that's the child safety, the court technology and security, and then the public safety. One thing that we did include in the public safety is additional training money for the law enforcement officers, because that's what the money, is used for. But of course, we are using the current revenues and reserves for it, so we're okay on that. If you'll notice on CETA, I don't have I have their revenue, but I don't have any of their expenditures yet because they're working on their numbers. So hopefully we'll have something before we meet next.
And that's the discrete component unit?
I'm sorry?
Yes,
I don't- okay.
that's correct.
The deficit in the hot budget, is that, I mean, do we feel good about planning that big of a deficit for Moolah? $78,000?
We had talked previously about having it smaller. That was the direction from the council. If we were gonna do it this year, is to have it like, where it's 40,000 net coming in, but, since we skipped this year, Mr. Barnes felt that we were back to square one as if it's a new event again. So
I was gonna
I'll
say,
let him address it.
Mr. Mr. Haskey, the accounting for the first year of Moolah Fest was a deficit of approximately that amount of money. I think it was $80,000 or $81,000, something like that. We feel that this is that particularly the hotel motel tax is a worst case scenario, both from a revenue side and an expenditure side. We feel that if Moolah Fest is able to happen next year, we think that we will be able to capitalize some savings from our experience from the first one, because we made some mistakes. But we think that we should be okay with that number. I think it's going to be. I think that's a worst case scenario number, to be honest with you. We had originally budgeted, the first year we'd have budgeted, I want to say $120,000 loss, and ended up at the 80,000 mark, which is essentially where we are now.
Didn't we have some additional expenses because I'm going to rebook the carnival people and something else?
It was not the carnival people, it was the music groups, and the various contracts that we had, and that Monica made a great point. Some of the things that we did that cost money that we probably may or may not do again is the inflatables. The balloons are a huge part of that, but they're not absolutely necessary. But yes, sir, we do feel, I'm beating around the bush, yes, sir, we feel that that's a pretty decent number.
So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Of course, all these other 180 some odd pages is all the detail of all of that rolled into final numbers or draft numbers. For the capital requests, we've listed each of those and depicted which ones are carryovers, that are things that are budgeted this year that we will not get completed, like the Green Ribbon Grant and the Eastside Sewer, obviously. And then what is the department requested, and then what is in the administration request. On the capital, one thing that I didn't actually provide in this, but I did it for myself because we needed to know, is, we included engineering for the well fields. We also included the engineering for the transmission line, and then also $28,000 for the aquifer storage recovery analysis. That is so that if we can get that done, there's a possibility we can do a Texas Water drinking revolving fund loan grant, and the aquifer storage recovery would allow it to be a green piece, which means you get a bigger loan forgiveness if we decided to go, if we could go that route. But if you look in the next couple of years, there's, 706,000 for the transmission line that we've estimated would happen in year 21, 22, and then 22, 23, we've got 4.8 million for the wells, the piping, the roads, and the electrical. So we're gonna have to be looking at, even though this year the water fund is looking fairly decent with what we've got in there, we've got those costs coming up, big costs, in the next couple of years that we really need to put the rates in now so that we can have, you know, a third of it this year, a third of it the next year, and then the rest of the third the year after, so that we can get that project, you know, completed.
What would debt service be on $7 million bucks?
So what, right?
3?
At a 20-year?
Mm-hmm. 600,000?
Probably.
So 600,000 bucks?
Mr. Mayor, I was gonna say, we borrowed 13 million, so, and I think our payment is 635,
But at
6.
But that's at 1%, though, 1.1%. Don't you think rates will go up in a year and a half?
Possibly.
So somewhere between 300,000 to 500,000 bucks. So we gotta get ready for that, because we gotta have 7 million bucks, we're gonna have to
Right.
borrow it. So we need to have the funds ready for it, in my opinion.
Right, and so, we do have the engineering for the ground storage tank at the airport, but the actual, tank itself would be 1.7 million. So that's also coming up in the next 2 years after this one, so, I've been running some analysis on rates and what we're looking at deficits and what we need over the next 3 years. And obviously, whatever we decide to do, if we cash fund it, it's gonna be a much bigger rate increase than if we decide to try to get some sort of loan for it. So, we'll probably be looking for some direction as to the council's, pleasure in that respect.
Mayor, I'm afraid that's not gonna be a palatable increase to try to fund that out of pocket. And we're looking at around 8.5 million, give or take, to do those projects. And this way, we could go ahead, begin the engineering and the construction on the projects and have them probably up and going in 2 to 3 years. The well field, the storage tank, and the transmission line, and have it all completed. And if we try to accumulate that kind of funds that quickly through the rates, it's gonna be a staggering.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I'm just saying that if we go out and borrow the money, the debt service is gonna be, if you just did it one time, it's gonna be 350 to 600,000 bucks. We need that kind of rate to start getting ready to pay for that
We
money.
need to go ahead and implement that now.
Correct.
To be able to, hopefully, next
That's
fiscal year.
that was my point.
Yes, be able to go out for the loans and/or grants. There are several programs that Mr. Williams is looking at through the state that will hopefully give us some better interest rates than we can get on the open market.
And our president keeps talking about infrastructure.
Sorry, how much increase per resident would it be to fund a 600,000 limit?
Well, for 600,000, if you did it based just on the per 1,000-gallon rate, it'd be like $1 per 1,000 gallons they use. So depending on what you use would depend on what your increase would be.
Any idea of what the average bill is?
Yeah, so you have somebody, typically, the average for like a couple people is about 6,000 gallons a month. So your elderly woman that's living alone on Social Security, she's using probably 1,000 to 2,000 gallons a month
Should be $1 or $2
for that. And
per
then,
month.
you know, you get a family of 4, you could be looking at $12.
If you sprinkle a sidewalk, be more. But Alan and I, Jason and Monica talked also, we want to look at you call it an industrial rate, institutional rate.
Yes, sir. Charleston State University is responsible for about 8.5%, 8.6, I think it is, percent of our usage, and they supply approximately 6.2% of our revenues. So there's some disparity there. I think the school district has much smaller imbalance than that. So we're looking at an institutional rate that our educational facilities would fit into.
And if we didn't want to do it on the per 1,000 gallon charge, we could do it on the base rate. Looking at a few other communities, there's some room for growth there because we are one of the cheaper per, base rates as well. So there's several different ways we could accomplish that, getting that money.
Probably a combination of things, wouldn't you guess?
I honestly think, yeah, in the long
Yeah.
run, it'll probably be a little bit of a combination of both.
I think that's right.
But we've got coming $7 million for the well field, $1 million for storage tank, $500,000 for engineering study, and the Harbin Drive infrastructure. So we're looking at $9.5 million, $9 million probably, or $9.5 million in the next 4 years of expense.
12 to 13. isn't it?
Well, 4 of it's that Project CS funding, that, what do we want to call it, 380, 360 agreement?
I think that's a 311.
311 agreement, that's where 4 of that went to.
Right. Just the harbor part of it was.
8,
The Harbin part's.
8.5, but the water part of it's what I'm talking about, would only
Oh, I
be
got you.
700,000 or 800,000
Okay,
bucks or
sorry,
whatever.
Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, you're right, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
So, that's all I have, unless anybody has any specific questions.
Does anybody have anything they want to ask Monica or Alan or Jason to bring back? Have you considered, I want you to look at the effect of, or the cost of, or what would happen if we did this?
I had a question on the fire station number 2, CO has about 11 years on it. Looks like it's at about 4.25%. Would there be any, would that be worth looking at, restructuring that, refinancing that? Would there be any savings realized there? Looks like there's about 2.6 million in principal left.
We would certainly have to look at it, but given the favorable rates that we have now, that's a possibility. However, there is some issue with the federal government. I am not sure if they have, in all the COVID stuff, there's been talk about including advance refunding in some of the bills. We'd have to research to see if they had, because probably 4 years ago, the the Congress passed a law that did away with advance refunding of municipal bonds. So short answer is we'll have to see.
And I believe, Alan, you'll have to remind, I don't think anybody else, well, Stacy and Jason were here, that fund wasn't just the fire department, it was also
It was
$1.5
streets.
million or $2.5 million street construction over by what's now the concrete plant, is that right? So some of it, we actually funded a street project, we borrowed $4 million or so, and I think the fire department was only 2-point-something million of that.
Yeah, it
So
was
some of that was
definitely-
actually streets.
Yeah,
also.
there were streets included in that.
I think
had to
that's
go
right.
back.
I don't remember the percentages, but I believe
I
that's
think it's
correct.
2.7 to 1.3, something like that.
I think you're right.
So we don't keep away from having to borrow money like that and pay streets, we need to come up with something to pay for streets. And Mark McClinton has the answer, he said.
I do. But you just don't want to hear it. I just, we've talked about specific projects in water. Monica mentioned stormwater. And as we're looking at this, I don't want us to lose sight, focusing on specific projects that we know are coming, so much so that we forget about general projects that we don't know of yet, that just as things happen,
Correct.
we've got to have some money. So let's make sure, if you would, that we are factoring in a little bit on that as
Point
well.
well taken.
Mr. McClinton, I'll say you're preaching to the choir on that.
Okay, thank you. Amen, brother.
Monica, I've
Is that
got a
altar call?
question. Is there any
We'll pass the plate here in a minute.
budgetary, any budgetary plans for the retirees COLA in this budget?
There is not.
And
I did get with the TMRS and have them send me the information for a plan rate study, plan change study. And it would cost the city about $500,000 to reinstitute that COLA, just each year. So, I mean, this year.
in a single year?
Yes. Because of the way that it's calculated, that COLA is not, it's not a one-time deal. What you're doing, so the first problem that happened is when the COLA was put into place is it was never funded until 2009. So for the people that were working in prior to 2009, their TMRS and their calculation of the rate, the funding of the COLA, which is basically when you retire, if you're getting $2,000 a month in your pension, then you get the CPI and you get 70% of it as a rate increase. And you get that every year until you pass away, and then if you have a beneficiary, then until your beneficiary passes away too. So it's just this compound thing on top of each other, on top of each other. I calculated it, somebody making a $75,000 a year after 20 years retirement, just at a 3%, 70% COLA, 3% CPI, you end up making $95,000, so you get a $20,000 increase over a 20-year period. So it is quite costly the way they do it. They were not requiring a funding on it until 2009. That's why, at that point, the rates jumped significantly. When I came on board in 2016, we were paying almost 15%, and our percent we should be paying is 12 because it's a 2-to-1 match, but we were paying almost 15% because of trying to get caught up on that COLA, that deficit. And what they've done is they've amortized the deficit. I think it's either 25 or 30 years. I'd have to go back and double check that. So you're biting away at it a little at a time. The way that when we instituted, it's not just on the people that are retired.
The future
So-
people who retire.
Yeah, so everybody that's currently working for the city, everybody that had worked for the city and quit but didn't take their money out of TMRS, you're paying to advance fund, basically to put the money aside so that when I retire, the money's in there to cover however long I live and however long my beneficiary should live. So I talked to TMRS about, even just getting out of TMRS, because that question had come up. And it's like almost a century to do that, because you have to wait until like everybody that has ever, that has ever worked for TMRS dies, and all their beneficiaries die as well. So it's a quite costly endeavor to have the COLA, and that's why so many plans like TMRS have started taking that away, because it's not really, it's very hard to sustain it. And so when Mr. Self, when he made his presentation, one of the things that he didn't tell you guys is what rates that those other cities are paying. And they're paying, their contribution rate is, 14, 15, percent contribution rate.
I remember ours was almost 17% at one point. And what we were doing is we were taking, we were able to, in the report, recognize that we still owed money, and yet we were paying at 17%. And then what happened was we passed a law, I think it's a federal law, that says now you have to recognize that liability, which is why we started having to say we're $5.7 million in the hole on the retirement plan. So that was a snapshot, plus any future loss. That could have been $7 or $8 million before too long. And so that's why they made the recommendation they did 3 years ago, I guess.
And to clarify, the funding of COLAs not being funded until 2009 was not just the city of Stephenville.
No, it was statewide.
What happened is that TMRS hired a new executive director who brought in some new amortization folks, or whatever they're called.
Actuaries.
I know it started with
Here's
an
one.
A. They brought in some new actuaries that actually sounded the alarm that that a lot of pensions are hearing today back then. And that's why we had a feeling as to what the result would be if we got out of TMRS, is because a couple of cities did at that time. And I think one of them is back in TMRS. But a lot of cities, some cities had to pay as much as 20 or 22%.
Fort Worth Fire Department, I think, was $500 million in the hole.
They're not TMRS.
That's right, but it was a similar plan with the COLA.
Exactly, and honestly.
And they weren't funding it enough.
TMRS, I think the goal is to have your retirement funded at 80-something% or something like that. And the cities in the state of Texas were something like 20% below that. So if it was 85%, they were at 65%. And so that's why the big makeup, and that's why nobody's at 12 or 14 or wherever they're supposed to be. So it's not just us, it's everybody. What this council did, and I'm a future retiree from here. I mean, the way TMRS works, I could have retired my first day on the job because of my previous experience, or the fact that I'm old.
You are?
Yeah.
I'm
But,
as old as Gerald, though.
or you, Mr. Mayor.
Or me.
Are you?
Or old, him.
Sorry, I took a playbook.
There you go,
paid
took
for
out
it.
his playbook, there you go.
But
Y'all do
seriously.
it next month, he's gonna be as old as me, though.
Seriously, you know, I had to think long and hard before I suggested that we recommend the elimination of the COLA. Some of the cities I've worked for in the past do have COLAs, some of the cities don't. It came down to my bottom line versus the bottom line of the city, and you pay me to look out for the bottom line of the city. And being $5 million, $6 million underfunded and only seeing that curve go up over the foreseeable future. That's the reason that we discussed and ultimately recommended that we do away with the COLA.
It doesn't address the retirees, current retirees. We need to deal with that issue at some point, what your question is. But that's why we built in last year into the budget. We haven't figured out how to do it yet. A 1% additional to make up for that COLA for current employees going forward. And at some point, we need to address the other as well.
So if you'll look at the plan change study, this is what TMR sent me for this next.
What page is that on?
What page?
I didn't include that.
Okay,
This is,
I can see.
Okay.
is it not picking up on my screen?
Yeah,
No,
but
it's not
Here,
big enough.
Here,
Is
let
it-
me
3 font.
make it bigger.
Alan and I need it bigger.
Is that better? Make it a little bit
Yeah.
bigger.
go.
Read it to me, Alan.
Okay. So currently, our rate will be 7.31. Actually, we're not gonna take the prior service, credit, so it'll be a little bit more than that. 7.84, I guess is what it is, 83. If we were to change to a 30% repeating COLA, it would change to 10.06%. The 50% would go to 12.47%, and the 70% would go to 15.05%. When I plugged in the 15.05% in there, it increased our TMRS and cost us an additional $500,000 in our salaries
First year.
for this year. And that was something that, you know, it would stay pretty close to that 15% rate, depending on how the returns on their investments come in. But it is quite costly. And the thing about going to a 30% or a 50% COLA is because the way that they currently calculate it is it goes back to where you were from the beginning. So if you've had somebody that's been on retirement for 20 years and you go down to a 30% repeating COLA, they go back and calculate it as if you were on 30% from the beginning. So the lady that I talked to at TMRS, and her name is, I can't think of it at the moment, she said some of the people that have been on for a while wouldn't get anything. So even just going to the 30% would not impact the retirees. What I'd like to do is, because if we wanted to put it back in now, we could, but you're looking, to fund it about 4 cents on the tax rate. And that's a lot to ask the taxpayers to pay for people that are retired. I think we need to have TMRS come in, the lady that is their actuarial, to come in and talk to you guys, and I'm sure she can probably do a much better rate and answer more of your questions than I can, on how this works and the things that we can do. There is some things that we can do. You can do an ad hoc COLA for retirees, and you only pay for it that one time, so that 1 year you would have an increase in your rate. And it's only for the people that are currently retired. It doesn't cover like everybody. But it is a little bit costly. She says if you do it, 2 or 3 times, you should have probably just done the rate increase, the repeating COLA. But, and if you do it too frequently, I think twice in 5 years, then you have to do your reporting as if it's a repeating thing anyway. So,
Monica?
But you don't have to fund it.
Am I reading this correctly? If we did something like the 70%, which would bring it to 15.05% annually, locally, we would assume 6.4, we would have to count and assume a $6.4 million unfunded liability?
No, you're reading it correct. That is correct.
Can I ask another question about that? Current, and again, I'm older than Alan. Current rate is 7,
7%? 7.
and we're
7.31%.
funding and we're giving employees 12%. So
Yes.
some of that was the buy down of that debt that we had. So when does that 7% go to 12%?
Well, it never actually does.
Okay, what does it go to at what point?
Yeah.
What I
Because we're going to have to
talked-
fund that for current employees.
Right, so what the deal is I talked to TMRS, the lady I spoke with. She said if we never go back to a COLA again, our rate will cover about 8%. Because what happens if somebody gets out of TMRS, takes their money out, and doesn't retire, somebody that's 20 years old, works for us for 4 years, so at 24, they pull their money out, the 6% that they paid in and whatever, the 5% that it's earned. The city's money that's been put in on their behalf goes into the fund. And so part of the rate calculation, and that's why plans like TMRS became so desired by governmental entities, is because that city's portion goes in to help fund everything else. So because I asked this question, I was like, so a brand new employer coming in that just like a 6%, 2 to 1, they pay 12%. No, they don't. Because they take into consideration the fact that there's people that are not going to stay longevity wise, and they're gonna pull their money out, but the city's money is gonna stay in.
So is that rate calculated on the historical Stephenville forfeiture rate, or is it a statewide rate?
Yeah.
That would be a good question for TMRS.
That's,
Okay.
each city's rate is calculated differently. So it's individually, that's the reason we had so.
So it
much-
would be based on Stephenville?
That's correct.
You can explain that better.
Because they do the actuarial based on our employees, the people who are actually on the plan.
Okay.
Could you furnish us a copy of that, please, ma'am?
Sure.
Thank you.
I thought I'd emailed it out to you guys previously when it came up, but I'll email it again. So, no, there is no money, we do not have anything in this budget to address the COLA for the retirees.
Well, and I have had several contacts, and I suspect that other council members and His Eminence the Mayor also has probably had some contacts about that, and will continue to, I suspect.
Were there any other citizen requests besides the COLA?
Let's see, we did have several requests came in regarding the funding the library. to keep it accredited. What we have in there now, plus what we're allowed to show as matching,
In
they
kind?
call it matching funds
Is
for
it
the.
in kind?
In kind.
In kind, yes, thank you. In kind for, basically the payroll function, the AP function, that kind of thing. We can keep it accredited.
He also received a request for repairs on Long Street.
Do we have that in the budget?
I'm sorry?
Do we have the repairs in the budget?
For Long Street? No, sir, that's a $4 million job.
And Mark's gonna fund it for us someday soon.
If somebody wants to write us a check for that, we'll be more than happy to take it. It will be tax deductible.
He's a brilliant man, that's why I got him on the finance committee chair. Any other questions for them, or something you wanted to get to work
I'll
on?
say, it's not so much a question, I know it'll take a lot more digging to come up with anything, but it still concerns me that our fire service continues to ask for personnel, and we have them in other places in the city. And we've gone a decade without adding fire service personnel. 10 years ago, they had 31 personnel, today they have 31 personnel. But 10 years ago, they had 13 volunteers, but no longer have either. And our non-public safety positions have grown 22%, roughly, I think 22% in that 10 years. And our police department has grown about 12%, but we've not addressed our fire service, and their call volume's up about 50% on fire calls, and I believe about 15% on the EMS calls. I think that's something we can't continue to gloss over as we continue to grow. We've got to figure out how to get them the personnel they need. I know a lot of that problem is that right now they're very, we are not competitive in that with other departments. That's a problem that may change in the next few years, that may come back. But that's something I'd like to see us continue to explore how we can address that. That may be, even if that's a 3 to 5 year plan to get where we need to be, that's what we need to do. So if we could get something going towards that in this year's budget, that would, I would feel much better.
Monica, and Alan and I and Jason talked about that today, this afternoon some, and we're budgeting funding at what for ad valorem?
What we would consider to be our known new revenue rate, or effective tax rate is what it used to be called. So, which would keep us close to
The
47 cents.
the budget, we were given a number of 1.48, something like that, billion dollars in ad valorem value. We have been basing our budget approximately on last year's valuations. We were told this week that the estimate by the CAD is that we're going to be at about 1.425 or 1.2 or something like that.
Which is 100 million less
Yeah,
than
about
what,
$100
or
million
more than what you've put in this budget, so in doing so.
There could be some room in the budget
Get
for
certified
that.
values.
Right.
So I suggest they bring some recommendations, because I knew you'd be asking that question.
Another question, I guess, and it kind of follows on what Councilman Thurman just talked about. Is there a database available to cities? How do we measure ourselves against other cities and what their staffing levels are for the police and the fire protection numbers? I realize every city's different, but if you look at the cumulative numbers,
Oh, I'm sure there is. As a
and
matter of fact, I know
are
there
we, with our number of firefighters, are we above or below? Or same thing with police departments?
we can.
I'd
we can
like
have
to
that-
know.
We can have that number for you on on the 17th.
Okay, that'd be great.
May be able to email it. I mean, it may be. just
I'm sure that we're probably
simple
not
as
there with regard to
calling
salaries and things like
looking at
that,
TML,
but,
and they run those numbers a lot of times.
okay,
North Central Texas Council of Governments does as well.
okay.
I think one
Be
of the
good.
problems that Chief Chew has expressed in the past is his department runs on shifts. So you can't just hire one person.
Right.
You have to hire multiples to work.
You have to have
into the
three.
shift. Right. And so you can't just put one, you have to get the others also at the same time to make the numbers continue to work. And that's been our roadblock. I understand what you're saying, I agree with you, but that's been the issue in the past, is coming up with the ability to fund all of that at one time. And it's not something you can do one at a time like you can in some other departments.
There's just
I
a,
know there are some grants available, about $350 million a year nationwide in the federal safer grant that is to help with that. But actually, it looks like maybe in the 2020 program, typically it steps down year 2 and year 3. I think it's a 3-year grant that you kind of move into those. But it looks like there's a possibility that the 2020 program, if you can show an economic hardship due to COVID, I think that may be 100% all 3 years. So might be something worth
well,
looking into.
again, this
And it can be
benchmarking
used
is
for-
important.
It does not just have to be used for new hires, it can also be used for retention and recruitment.
Yeah,
Another thing I think it's, Monica, I think the meeting's gonna be next Monday, I think, what we talked about. I've got an outside consultant, CPA, that has worked with cities a lot. Happens to be my wife. And we're gonna visit about, because there is some question about, are we actually charging the enterprise funds, the administrative overhead, the allowable overhead? Which means then if they're not, then ad valorem tax and sales tax are supporting infrastructure, or supporting enterprises. So there may be some additional funding that's potentially there. You know, we could do that, like what you were just talking about, we could restructure, instead of doing $7.5 million in 3 or 4 years, we could do it in 7 years or whatever, bring the water to town and build the first 2 wells and then do a well every other year or something and fund that differently, which would then allow us to pay those other debts to administration, which is going to give us some more, expendable funds that you could use for something like that. So it's a good point.
okay.
Anybody else? I just want to make one comment. If y'all just look at requests versus administration recommendations, these 3 made some really tough decisions for us. And I appreciate the work y'all did. I really do. It's a, I told him, I told Alan the other day, I still have $500,000 I can find in there, and he started choking. And all of us have some kind of comment of where we spend or where we get money or how we cut or whatever. And that's what we'll do on the 17th, 19th, and 20th, have that opportunity to do that. Those kinds of things. But I want y'all to know, I think this is a great start. I really appreciate the work y'all put into it.
Thank you. I do want to say, each year when you begin to cut budget, directors tend to want to discuss it very actively. This year, everybody understands the dilemma that we're in, and this year, not only were they not fighting us, they were helping us find things in their budget that they could cut.
Anybody have any other questions to get ready for for 2 weeks from now, or a week and a half?
Jason, you want the emails with questions?
I'm sorry, sir?
Do you want the emails with questions, or Alan, you want them?
Send them to all 3 of us.
Okay.
Hearing no other questions, then is there another, I'll give you a chance to close out, or anything else to say?
No, sir, thank you.
It is 6:32, and I'm going to close this city council work session.